Good morning and welcome to Between the Covers. I'm David Naiman, your host. Today's guest, David Mitchell, is best known for his intricately plotted novels, ones that adventure across the globe from Ireland and Mongolia to New York and Iraq, but also novels that span multiple time frames, from an 18th century Dutch trading post in Nagasaki Harbor to a futuristic dystopian Korea. From the get-go, David Mitchell's 1999 debut novel, Ghostwritten, received the John Llewellyn Rhys Prize for the best work of British literature by an author under 35, a book that A.S. Byatt declared as one of the best debut novels she had ever read. In 2003, Mitchell was selected as one of Granta's best young British novelists, and in 2007, after the critical acclaim for his novels Cloud Atlas and Black Swan Green, Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. David Mitchell is here today on Between the Covers to talk about his latest novel, Bone Clocks, a book that not only travels the globe and travels through time, but also takes time itself as its central subject matter. Welcome to Between the Covers, David Mitchell.
Thank you very much, David. It's great to be here, and thanks also for that enthusiastically researched introduction.
Well, let's start with time. What about time compelled you to make a book that not only spans a great amount of time, but also contemplates it?
Time. Wow. This is straight in at the deep end, isn't it? How could you not be interested in time? It's like being a fish and not being interested in the sea. I mean, it's where we live. It's famous, I think an American astrophysicist, Wheeler, said this. It's what stops everything happening all at once. It's fascinating stuff. We live in it. We live through it. It ages us and changes us and turns us from tiny, tiny, tiny little one-celled being to birth, the 7 stages of man, into the care home if we're lucky, old age being a privilege that is denied to many. Isn't it interesting? Aren't you interested in time?
I am very interested in time. We were born in the same year, and you've
Right.
mentioned that.
Right. Oh, you look younger than me. That's because you haven't been on a 5-week book tour. That's why.
That's true. But you've mentioned Bone Clocks as being, in a way, a midlife crisis or a taking of account at midlife. Is that true?
Yeah, there's something in that. Maybe not so much time in a metaphysical sense, but mortality in a visceral, physical sense is maybe what the book's heart is.
And one of the questions that you propose is, what sort of Faustian bargain would you be willing to accept to potentially not have to confront mortality?
Sure. In a sense, to make yourself immune from the aging side effects of time. Yes, I do. Would you be willing to have your conscience amputated if this deal meant that other people had to suffer for it? Would you be willing to make the deal if every 10, 15 years you were willing to you had to fake your own death and move on and start somewhere else before people began to notice you weren't getting any older?
And for those who haven't read Bone Clocks, what is a bone clock exactly?
It's us. You and I are bone clocks. There's a cult, a kind of a cult in the novel, who do engage in this kind of a Faustian pact with a Gnostic occult machine set up many centuries ago, and you can't tell from their faces how many years they've lived and how many years they have yet to live. Whereas with our faces, you can guess our ages because our faces tell the time of our lives. So they disparagingly call us bone clocks because they are not bone clocks.
Well, one of the really interesting things about Bone Clocks and about a specific bone clock is the book seems at first glance really like an epic. I wrote down a list of, and I'm sure I didn't get them all, but we're in Cambridge, we're in Switzerland, we're in Manhattan, we're in Vancouver, we're in Russia, Australia, Colombia, Shanghai, Iraq, and Iceland.
Wow, I clocked up the air miles, didn't I?
Yeah, and we spend time in the England of Margaret Thatcher, the Iraq of now, and the Ireland of the future when we run out of oil. But if you look closer, at the skeleton of the book or the spine of the book, it's really spans the course of one specific person's life, which almost feels hidden within all of this movement. Tell us about this person and essentially this person's bone clock that we're following in the course of the book.
I like your metaphor because skeletons are hidden, and Holly Sykes, the protagonist of the first and sixth parts, and the narrator of those parts, is kind of the skeleton of the book. She sometimes goes off camera, but pretty soon the camera finds her again. In the first section, we meet her as a teenage punkette runaway. In the second section, she's away for a while, but the protagonist kind of stumbles across her and is attracted to her in a Swiss ski resort in the early 90s. In the third section, we meet her kind of pretty much immediately because she's the partner of the narrator of that section. The narrator's a war reporter back from the Battle of Fallujah in Iraq in 2004, back for a family wedding on the south coast of England at Brighton. And Holly is the mother of his child, his daughter, his 6-year-old. In the fourth section, she is a very improbable best-selling writer and a colleague, a first arrival of the narrator of that section. He's a past his best British novelist of fading powers who is pining for the glory days when he was the wild child of British letters and straddled the bestseller lists on both sides of the Atlantic. And he meets Holly and feels contempt for her at first, but at festivals, and it's kind of this world. It's a novella set in the book tour. Monstrously vain novelist's world. The fifth part, that's almost, if I start talking about that, we'll take up the whole 45 minutes of the programme, I fear, but that's a more fantastical part where the laws of physics and nature get bent and then broken and then exploded. And Holly is wrapped up in that. She's in her late 40s, early 50s by then, I think. And then we meet her in the final part, as a grandmother and as a guardian of a ward and of course she has a 70-year-old woman's body by then in the west of Ireland.
And you originally had a different structure. I read that you actually were thinking of having each chapter be a year of Holly Sykes' life originally.
Yeah, it didn't work. For the first 8 years, she didn't do a lot because she was a toddler and an infant and then a very young girl, and vocabulary is limited at that age. That might have worked. Problem is we read short stories in a different way to how we read a novel. It's not that we skip stuff. Well, we might skip stuff if the novel's no good, but you read a short story more like a poem. Every line needs to count and you sort of study it and you take everything in. Whereas with a novel, we have different gears of attentiveness, I think. And a novel made of short stories, especially one after another, you basically never know when to sit up and pay attention and when not to.
And when I read your novels, I consider you in the maximalist school of literature. And yet I wondered if you are compelled by constraint-based writing, if there was something about setting out with the constraint of trying to write every year or coming up with some sort of substructure for the novel helps you even in a maximalist enterprise.
Oh, constraints are great. You can't really have originality without original constraints. Constraints are your friend. They're a pain in the butt, but they're your friend. No, it wasn't that the constraint was too great. It's just it just wasn't working, and
it wasn't the right one.
Yeah, it wasn't the right constraint. So yeah, I traded in that constraint for a constraint of 6 novellas. It was going to be 7, but I thought I could do the first, Holly's girlhood, in implanted backflashes in the later ones, and thereby save the book 100 pages, which I think was the right move. It's already pretty hefty.
You have a particular knack and talent for writing a certain type of man in your books, I believe. And
Thank you.
I was trying
Do
to
I?
yes, I was trying to
Yeah,
figure
go
out
on.
what this type of man was.
Okay.
But I would call him ethically impaired and often comically and horribly self-consumed. But yet, despite this, just addictively delightful to spend time with.
Thank you.
And you've done that in multiple novels where you just want to spend time with these somewhat horrible male characters. And I was curious what it was like. It feels like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like Bone Clocks has the most sustained female protagonist for you in your work.
It does. It certainly does. Yeah.
And
It's
I
got
was
female energy.
interested in how that was. Was that an easy transition, or was that a challenge and a difficulty for you?
It was a challenge. It's quite a tall order to write across the gender divide in a sustained way, in a psychologically probing way. Probably even harder for men to write women than for women to write men, I think, because we live in a sexist society and they need to work out how we think to protect themselves in a way that men do not necessarily, in fact quite rarely, reciprocate. So yes, it was a challenge, but that's why it's attractive. That was a part of the constraint, and I knew there'd be a lot of men in it anyway. So a lot of female energy in a sort of yin-yang balancing kind of way was it seemed an intelligent way to go about the novel. My wife helped me basically. She's my secret weapon, and she just.
Well, I think you pulled it off.
Thank you. I hope so. I never know. But I hope I did, and I've met a few people who have assured me I have done, and not all of them male, which is reassuring.
Yeah. Ursula Le Guin, in her review of Bone Clocks, she compared some of your style in it to Virginia Woolf, and she said, while she does stream of consciousness, you do stream of self-consciousness, and she was looking at The Waves, which is told in past tense, Virginia Woolf's book, and also sort of marveling at Bone Clocks being a book about time, but a book that has no past, in the sense that it's written in the perpetual now, in the present tense. Did you know you were going to write Bone Clocks in the present tense? And is that somehow related to the theme?
Yeah, if you write in the present tense, especially first person present tense, in a way it can't not be about time. Novels have certain default themes. Time is one, because novels take place over time. You can't have it happening all at once. It's a linear, sequential art form, unlike a painting, which is simultaneous. Novels are also sort of automatically about identity. I mean, you've got people in them. You're making a person in them. A novel can't really not be about identity. It can't not be about memory either, for the same reason. You can spot these default themes on book descriptions on back jackets when the author and the writer or the editor aren't quite sure how to describe the novel. So you time and time again get sort of an enchanting meditation on identity, memory and time. Yeah. How often have you read that?
A million times.
Not knocking it. I think I probably used the same formula. But my last novel was also, that was third person present tense. I kind of like that constraint. You move forward at the speed of time. You're sort of like a surfer who never falls off the surfboard on the wave of now. Mm-hmm. Of course, there are costs to it. Narratorial omniscience, forget it. That's not going to happen, for one thing. You are chained to that surfboard. But it's sort of a surfboard I like. I think for the next one, I'd best stop it now. I've kind of done enough present tensing, and I'd sort of maybe go back to the past. Maybe third person past. I might do something really traditional. That could be fun.
Well, you mentioned the loss of omniscience and retrospection in the constant present tense, but you sort of solve that a little bit with having the part of the story be people who are immortal. And you mentioned the cults. And on the one hand, the Bone Clock is about a single human life. On the other hand, it is an epic, fantastical battle between immortal time travelers, right?
Sort of. They're time travelers by virtue of the fact that they don't really ever properly die. They're not time travelers in the sense that they have a TARDIS or a time machine.
Right. That's a good point. But what's interesting is that you've said before that this fantastical element has allowed you to show the reader the way that human beings would be seen from time's perspective.
Oh, did I say that? That sounds quite clever.
Does that seem familiar to you? Can you talk about how one of the points of view by providing these figures in the book is one to see ourselves from the perspective of time?
Yeah, sure. My horologists have meta lives. So that's the chain of lives that they live. So the horologists are the more vegetarian immortals. Their immortality does not cost anybody anything. They simply die. They do age. They die. But however they die, 49 days later, they find themselves waking up in the body of a very sick child who has actually died, so the soul has vacated the building or the body. And the horologist's soul then enters that one. The horologists don't know why this happens. It's not an act of will. They can't get out of it. They're kind of stuck in a kind of Groundhog Day in a sense. But they have meta lives. And of course, Marinus, who's a character both in my last novel, he was having his 28th lifetime in 1799, 1800, and is now on his, or her 34th lifetime, I think, in about 2024, I think we meet her. For them, the human lives, even of humans they love, it's kind of like cats that we own. We own a sequence of cats who maybe live 7, 8, 9 years, maybe 13, 14 if we're lucky. Or if you live in West Cork, where I live, they appear to vanish after about 2 years and go and live in the house of the village mad cat lady because the food there's better. But our lives are that brief for them. So the horologists, in fact, there's one whose meta life has already lasted millennia. And their viewpoint is time's viewpoint. And, of course, they're sentient beings, so unlike time, which is an abstract continuum, the horologist can actually talk about it.
It's and it feels like a sneaky way around the present tense conundrum.
I'm a sneaky writer, David. I
think you are.
I'm a sneaky cat.
Well, let's let our listeners hear some of the prose from Bone Clocks.
Okay, well, let's try this. I've never read it before, but we'll see how it goes. It's a bit exciting.
Good luck.
Say 3, 2, 1, action.
3, 2, 1, action.
Underfoot, old leaves crackle and squelch, while overhead brand new leaves ooze unbundling from swollen buds, and the wood is blue-toothed with birdsong. At the base of a trunk, the girth of a brontosaurus's leg, I find a gravestone. Here's another, and another smothered by ivy. Blythewood's campus cemetery, then, is not a regimented matrix of the dead, but a wood, whose graves are sunk between and nourish the roots of these pines, cedars, yews, and maples. Esther's glimpse was precise, tombs between the trees. Rounding a dense holly tree, I come across Holly Sykes, and think, who else? I haven't seen her since my visit to Rye 4 years ago. Her cancer is still in remission, but she looks gaunter than ever, all bone and nerve. Her head wrap is the red, green, and gold of the Jamaican flag. I scuff my feet to let her know someone's coming, and Holly slips on a pair of sunglasses that conceal much of her face. "Good morning," I venture. "Good morning," she echoes neutrally. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was looking for Crispin Hershey." "He's right here." Holly gestures at the white marble stone. Crispin Hershey, writer, 1966 to 2020. "Short and sweet," I remark, "cliché-less." Yes, he wasn't a big fan of flowery prose. And a more peaceful, more Emersonian resting place, I say, I can't imagine. His work is urban and his wit's urbane, but his soul is pastoral. One thinks of Trevor Upwood in Echo Must Die, who finds peace only in the lesbian commune on the Isle of Muck. Holly inspects me through her dark lenses. She last saw me through a fug of medication, so I doubt she'll recall me, but I'll stay prepared. "Were you a colleague of Crispin's here at the college?" No, I work in a different field. I am a fan, though. I've read and reread Desiccated Embryos. He always suspected that book would outlive him. Attaining immortality is easier than controlling its terms and conditions. A blue jay swoops onto a fungus-ruffled tree stump by Hirsch's grave, emits a volley of harsh jeers, and then a breathy trill. They don't make those birds where I'm from, says Holly. It's a blue jay, I say, or a Cyanistchita cristata. The Algonquin name was Sideso, and the Yakama call it a Zvashgre, but their territory was over on the Pacific, so now I'm merely showing off. Holly removes her sunglasses. Are you a linguist? By default. I'm a psychiatrist, here for a meeting. You? I'm just here to pay my respects. Holly bends down, takes an oak leaf from the grave and puts it into her purse. Well, nice talking with you. Hope your meeting goes well. The blue jay threads a flight path through stripes of brightness and stripes of mossy dark. Holly begins to walk off. So far so good, I say, but the day's about to get trickier, I fear. Holly is struck by my strange answer and stops. I clear my throat. Miss Sykes, we need to talk. Down come the shutters. Out comes her hard-scrabbled Gravesend accent. I don't do media, I don't do festivals. She steps backwards. I've retired from all of that. A frond of pine tree brushes her head and she ducks nervily. So no, whoever you are, you can... I'm Iris Fenby this time around, but you know me as Marinus. She freezes, thinks, frowns, and looks disgusted. Oh, for Christ's sakes. You, Leon Marinus, died in 1984. He was Chinese, and if you have a Chinese parent, then I'm Vladimir Putin. Don't force me to be rude. That's rude. Dr. Leon Marinus was indeed childless, Holly, and that body died in 1984. But his soul, this I addressing you now, is Marinus, truly. A dragonfly arrives and leaves like a change of mind. Holly's walking off. Who knows how many Marinuses she's met, from the mentally ill to fraudsters after a slice of her royalties. You have 2 hours missing from 1st of July 1984, I call after her, between Rochester and the Isle of Sheppey. I know what happened. She stops. I know what happened. Despite herself, she turns to face me again, properly angry now. I hitched. A woman picked me up and dropped me off at the Sheppey Bridge. Please, leave me alone. Ian Fairweather and Heidi Cross picked you up. I know you know those names, but you don't know you were at the bungalow that morning, that day, when they were killed. Oh, whatever. Post a whole story at bullshitparanoia.com. The crazes will give you all the attention you need. Somewhere, a lawnmower chugs into noisy life. Look, you digested the radio people, you sicked it up, you mixed in your own psychoses, and you made an occult reality show starring yourself, just like that wretched girl who shot Crispin. I'm going now. Don't follow or I'll call the cops. Birds crisscross and warble in the stripes of light. That went well, says Orshima, the unseen and ironic, inside my head. I sit down on the blue jay's stump. It's a beginning.
You've been listening to David Mitchell read from his latest book, Bone Clocks. We've been talking about a couple different ways you're a sneaky writer, David Mitchell. But the way that I think you're the sneakiest...
My wife could give you a few more, but go on.
Okay. So the way that I think you're sneakiest is that I think with all of your novels, and Bone Clocks included, the first thing you feel is that you're going on a fun adventure. You're engaged, you're immersed, and you're going on a delightful journey of some sort. However, with Bone Clocks, I feel like you're sneaking a whole lot of darker themes into this, even though we're getting this primary feeling of pleasure. And it was interesting, again, in the Ursula Le Guin review, she calls it a freewheeling inventiveness, your style, but also then says that death is at the heart of the novel. And I was thinking, if you list all of the things that are in Bone Clocks, there's a whole bunch of things that you touch on. The debacle that is Iraq, that is ongoing, the post-oil climate change, apocalyptic future, the potential death of publishing, class anxiety. And you find a way to package this and sneak it into the book and contemplate it while making us almost feel like it's not happening at the same time. So what are you doing there?
Well, firstly, thank you. I could weep with gratitude at the intelligence of your remark. Thank you. Yes, I do all of that because I want to, because these themes matter to me, and because I wanted to write an omnivorous novel with all these things in. It is replete with ideas. I am at heart a novelist. I'm not at heart an academic or a critic or a scholar or a great big thinker or even a small thinker. I'm a novelist, but novels need ideas, like bread needs yeast and a diet needs vitamin C, of course. What's going on? I'm middle-aged. My relationship with mortality needs a reboot. This young guy who I'm used to seeing in the mirror is no longer there, actually, and you need to handle that and you need to think about it. It's serious stuff. Mortality is not an abstract over the horizon anymore. It's in your kneecaps, it's in your back, it's in your lungs.
Well, my favorite section was the last section. It was really amazing that the section that takes place in Ireland. It's post-oil climate collapse. It's a near future, but what's really fascinating to me about it is we're in this freewheeling sense of expanding possibility, and then we land in this place of real limitation, and all the things that we take for granted or took for granted are no longer possible, or if they're possible, they're extremely difficult. I was wondering if that was a direction you're going with future work. If there was something very fascinating about that limitation of place and capacity of those characters after what they'd been through in the first 5 sections.
Yeah. Holly, well, she's an old woman. She can't walk, but it's a future without cars, pretty much. And so she doesn't leave within a 1.5 mile radius of the opening of that whole final novella, compared to all the almost squanderous globe-trotting that goes on in earlier sections of the book. And those are the terms of the world. It's sort of more like the 17th century than the 21st in a way. It's a constraint, and as we've said, constraint and originality are linked. And I worry that it might be accurate. I worry that act of futurology may be something we're condemning our children to, certainly our grandchildren. If we don't invent nuclear fusion pretty darn quickly, I don't see how this world, this studio, our aviation, our agriculture, our manufacturing, the means by which we meet our plethora of ever-expanding human needs, I don't see how we'll meet them without oil, without fossil fuels to power the electrical grid that makes it all happen. I also didn't want to finish the book with the fifth. I didn't want to finish the book with a climactic battle. I wanted to show that actually whatever happens to you, there's always an afterwards, and an afterwards of that, and an after that, and an after that, until you die. It's not so much that I set out to sort of create this future dystopia. It's simply that I did set out to show the parabola, the arc of Holly's life, including when she's an old woman. And if you do that, then you have to show the world in which she's spending those last few years. And that's the world that I fear the 2040s might look like. I hope I'm wrong. We'll see. If we're lucky, we'll see.
Yeah. In the review for Roberto Bolaño's 2666 by Jonathan Lethem, he talks about, I don't know if you've read 2666.
I'm afraid I haven't, no.
But I'd highly recommend it if you haven't. But he talks about maybe Bolaño bringing in a new type of writing, which he called post-national writing. I felt like post-national writing could refer to your enterprise as well, and I wondered how that struck you, that word, both in terms of the capacity now in the freewheeling present of being able of the interconnectivity of the world, but also in the post-apocalyptic time, it would require a post-national solution to figure that one out. Because
state borders can no longer be policed. It's a cool term. I'll buy that. Jonathan Lethem's a very thoughtful and intelligent man. I need a little more help from you in terms of exactly what it is to kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably hard since
conform
you
to
haven't
Yeah.
read the novel he's referring to.
I must read it. I'll read it on the plane on the way home.
All right, it's a quick 700, 800 pages.
Just one of those. No, I do hereby pledge to read it very soon.
All right,
to you personally.
I can't wait for your review.
Oh, I don't review things. But for
your review to me. You can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
I'll email you. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. So as a child, you spent a lot of time drawing maps.
Yes, I did, and looking at maps. And since you've raised the subject, looking at Ursula Le Guin's maps in particular, in Earthsea, and the places the narrative never goes to, and I still know the names of islands in Earthsea. It's a fantastic fictional world, and yeah, I ached and burnt to make worlds like that myself. So I blame her. That's partly why I'm here. She's great. I met her 4 years ago. It's one of the best encounters of my life, and I always treasure it. And I'm so glad she didn't hate the bone clocks. That would have been crushing.
I really thought her review was an education also at the same time of the bone clocks.
I will read it at some point. At the moment, I've just asked my agent to send me name of the publication, positive, mixed, disobliging, and if it's positive or disobliging, then the name of the reviewer for different reasons, obviously.
Oh, interesting.
Maps, and I would draw maps and spend weeks on maps of fantasy worlds.
Yeah.
And I haven't gone the whole hog with that as an adult. I'm too interested in too many things to devote a lifetime's of creative energy into making my own Middle Earth or Westeros. But in a kind of a way I am, by having... It's not spatially... It's not a spatial map, it's a sort of relationship map by having...
Well, that brings us to the Uber novel.
The Uber novel.
And which really is, in a way, your map, I think.
It is, in a way, yeah.
Tell our listeners who have not heard the enterprise that is David Mitchell's Uber novel.
Oh, I spent about 30 seconds thinking of that name, and I should have spent about 3 months thinking of it. And I'm not sure if it's the right word, but it's stuck now. I guess I'm stuck with it. The Uber novel is the name I give for the novel that all of my novels are chapters of. In a way, it's like my fictional meta-life. If I were a horologist, then the bigger project, my Uber novel, would be my meta-life. It's not that my novels are prequels and sequels. They're not. They're standalone things that you can read and I hope enjoy and are prompted to think about without reference to anything else I've ever read. But if you have read other things I've read, then you will recognise people at different stages of their life coming back, bring their baggage with them, spilling it out into the new novel, like an overstuffed suitcase.
So it would be unfair to say that, for instance, in the Bone Clocks, we see characters from all your other novels appear in Bone Clocks, that they're not just cameos or little nods to your dedicated readers, but it is part of a larger narrative, essentially.
I mean, it's a narrative in progress. But yeah, I've implanted a few characters from my next book in there who have fairly minor roles. But Hugo Lamb, who's the joint second major character in this book, his appearance here has turned his previous appearance as a 15-year-old cousin of Jason Taylor, the narrator in Black Swan Green. Hugo's he's a precocious kid, and he's a little bit mad, bad, and dangerous to know. But kind of little did we suspect that just 6 years later, his life would be radically altered by this supernatural cult. So, if anything, kind of Hugo Lamb's appearance here has made his previous incarnation, I have to be careful with that word now, his previous appearance in Black Swan Green, a cameo. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it goes from major to minor, sometimes it goes from minor to major.
But you have a sense of many of your future novels, of what they're about.
About 4 or 5, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Is it?
It is.
Really?
Yeah, I love that.
I thought loads of writers have ideas for future books.
It's the first one on this show, I think.
Well, then I'm honoured.
Yeah. Good job.
I have to speed up, though. I mean, they take me about 3 or 4 years. Well, the last two have taken 4 years. And 5 novels times 4, I mean, I'll be 64 before the decks are clear at this rate. I have to speed up.
I love the Russian doll quality of this, that your novels are multiple novellas put together, and you're on the one hand, and then your novels are chapters of this larger novel at the same time.
I have to be both. I mean, the first clause is that in the sort of the prime directive in Star Trek terms is that they are standalone novels. I don't want to get into the business of obliging people to read other things. I
Right.
kind of want someone who's never heard of me to pick up the Bone Clocks first and really enjoy it.
And I think they could.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. In fact, I've met a few people who have said so. I mean, I guess these are people who come to my event, so I don't meet the people who might have picked it up and thought, geez, this sucks, because they wouldn't be appearing at my event, I guess. But hopefully there's more of the former and fewer of the latter.
Well, the interconnectedness in form and with the characters across novels, and even a couple cats that weave their way through,
You
your
noticed
novels.
the cats, you observant man.
Yes.
Have you spotted the ship?
No.
Okay, just a little hint.
Okay. But this interweaving, and along with some characters literally reincarnating,
Yeah.
and the tattoo that goes across the ages in Cloud Atlas, it all goes to the theme of connectedness. And I would take that further and say even that there's a theme in your work of attempts to communicate and communication, and the failure to communicate as well.
Yeah. That's archetypal theme number 2. Archetypal theme number 3 would be predacity and violence. But I interrupted you, David. That was rude. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
Don't really throw you off stride.
Well, it made me think of the memoir you translated, The Reason I Jumped, the memoir by the 13-year-old Japanese boy who has autism, and which brings up both the issue of translation, which is an issue that you explicitly have in 1,000 Autumns, and also the issues of autism, which both raise the question of how easy it is to translate our own experiences to another human being. How easy or hard is it for a person to translate our experiences and have them be understood by another person? Whether they have autism or even speak the same language, that's the challenge. But it seems like this book foregrounds that challenge even more.
It does, doesn't it? It sort of made a leap of metalepsis from the fictional level of reality into the real level of reality that we are talking in right now.
I wondered if maybe part of what gravitated you towards this translation and also to exploring this theme of interconnectivity was the mysteries of how anybody can share what they're experiencing subjectively with another person.
Oh, our motivation for translating The Reason I Jump was much less literary than that and much more practical. We have a son who has autism, and this book that my wife, who's Japanese, read in Japanese was easily the most helpful text we ever encountered. It's still true, to help us understand what was going on in our son's head. I mean, it's not, of course, there are as many kinds of autism as there are people with autism, and I'm not trying to set him up as some sort of guru who has a complete Rosetta Stone or a skeleton key that will work for every aspect of everyone's autism. It's not like that, but it does, for me, establish beyond doubt that the intellectual and imaginative life of people with even pretty severe autism is much, much, much richer than they are able to let us know is the state of their imaginations and intellect. And when you know that, just knowing that makes you shift your behaviour and attitude towards them. And that shift in behaviour and attitude again can then sort of spark off a virtuous spiral, which sort of does encourage you to expose them to more language and to raise your expectations of what they can do. And our son's responded to that really, really well. So I'm really grateful to that book. It wasn't a thematic exercise at all. However, as you point out, as it happens, the themes in my book are here as themes in my life as well. That's probably no accident and no surprise.
And you raise your kids in a bilingual home as well.
Yeah. not as a sort of rigid policy. It's just when you're tired, you slip into your mother tongue, of course.
Of course.
And sort of we want our kids to sort of be exposed to both languages. It's a shame not to. I mean, our son, because of his autism, is to a large degree non-verbal still, but his comprehension's really good, and he probably knows more Japanese words than I do.
Well, I mean, maybe I'm pushing this thematic issue too strongly, but when I thought of like If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, the book that you're in conversation with in Cloud Atlas is explicitly looking at the issue of translation and communication with the evil translator in that book. I was curious if Bone Clocks had a book that it was in conversation with, in the way that Cloud Atlas is in a conversation with Calvino, and the Number 9 Dream was in conversation with Murakami.
That's another really good question I've never been asked. Good one, David. Thank you. Bone Clocks is jealous of The Master and Margarita, but most novels that take the fairly risky, sneaky step of combining the political and the fantastic are jealous of Master and Margarita. Possibly in conversation. I mean, please don't think that I'm saying my books are as good as these, because only an idiot would do that. But Independent People by Haldor Laxness, it's great life tracking novel by Iceland's only Nobel laureate, Haldor Laxness. And that also it's kind of shot through with not quite episodes of the fantastic, but moments where, in a more sort of Henry James turn of the screw way, where it might be the mind that's doing it, or it might be really happening. It's probably the mind, but there's got sort of bits of Icelandic myth in that as well. And that follows the parabola of a life, and I read that at quite an influential point in writing the Bone Clocks. So maybe I could have those two. That's a really good question to ask people, though. What novel was your novel in conversation with?
Yeah,
I'll use that myself.
You had a pretty quick answer.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yes, I did have a quick answer, which is interesting. It might mean it's true.
Can you give us a little teaser on what your next novel is going to be about?
A little teaser, since you've been such a thoughtful interviewer. You mentioned way back at the beginning that this novel was originally going to be made of 70 short stories. It was. I got to about 15, including a really rich strand that I was really enjoying. It also has a supernatural theme. But it was going to be 5 stories spread out throughout the 70. I wrote the first 3, really liked them, and kind of know what the last 2 will be. Marinus will appear in the last one, in this present Iris Fenby manifestation, which is the voice who was narrating the section I read. It's kind of a very short spin-off series from the Bone Clocks. It'll be my first short book, and it'll be fun watching my publishers trying to make a short book look a little bit longer, rather than trying to make a thumping great stonker look a little bit shorter. So I'm going to try and get that done quickly. I just want to give these stories a home, because I feel they're too good just to let kind of get flushed away, or just to kind of languish in my notebooks for the rest of forever. However, after that, I want to get my teeth stuck into a heftier thing set in London, Soho, Greenwich Village, maybe a little bit of the West Coast, Laurel Canyon maybe, in the late 1960s, with a coda in the present day. But beyond that, it's best not to say too much, otherwise people hear and it then gets a Wikipedia page, and then I might change my mind and leave these sort of desiccated embryos of ideas that were never used, scattered throughout cyberspace.
Well, it was a pleasure having you on Between the Covers, David.
Oh, it's a real joy, David. Thank you very much for your time.
We were talking today to David Mitchell about his latest novel, Bone Clocks. You've been listening to Between the Covers. I'm David Naiman, your host.